Welcome to the cold council chamber this evening. My apologies for that. Before we start, can I also remind members that this meeting is being live streamed to the public this evening. So I ask you to put on your mics when you speak and turn them off when you're not speaking so that everyone can hear what you're saying. Thank you very much. Can I remind members, first off, apologies for absence. Have we any tonight, Matt?
None, Chair.
Thank you. Can you agree the published record of the meeting of the 8th of November, please?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Can remind members about section 106, local government finance items. Are there any? Item 11. Thank you very much. Remind you on item 11. And also remind members of disclosures of interest. Is there anyone with any disclosures of interest this evening? No. Okay. We have no business not covered by the current forward plan and no business of special urgency, no references from committees and other bodies, no recommendations from scrutiny or petitions. So we move on to item 8, which is my report, and it is to approve the replacement of Councillor Castleman with Councillor Begum on the following bodies: ALOC James Elmhouses, Bedfordshire Pension Fund Panel and Bedfordshire Pension Fund Committee. And I would request the Chief Exec to notify accordingly. Can I get agreement to that, please?
Yeah,
thank you very much. We now move on to item 2 and over to Aslam. Item 9, I should say, and over to Aslam.
Thank you, Chair. This is a straightforward report. As part of their Ofsted registration, Luton Adult Learning have to submit a self-assessment report to Ofsted once a year. And for the academic year, 1st August 2020 to 31st July 2021, Luton Adult Learning have assessed themselves as having a graded of good. Statistics show that many of the Luton's residents experience a range of difficulties, including economic deprivation, low skills and poor mental health. In addition, Luton is home to a large number of non-English speakers, and it is in this context that the service aims to use Luton Council's Education and Skills Funding Agency, ESFA, grant and the other funds so they have the greatest positive impact on the life chances of Luton citizens. By targeting areas of deprivation, the service works alongside the economic growth team to tackle poverty, aligning to 2040 vision. Ofsted use 4 key judgments in order to grade provision: quality of education, behaviour and attitudes, personal development, leadership and management. And the service have identified many strengths in all 4 areas, although there are some areas of the development for development which they have identified as the need for consistency in standardization and modernization across the curriculum areas, improved learner engagement with learners, focus groups, improved use of mobile phones as an effective tool to enhance learning, improve staff knowledge of local and national issues that affect learners, a reinstatement of the student hub area at the Arndale House to promote local initiatives and projects to learners, to work closely with the public employers and staff to promote apprenticeship. And I seek the agreement from the executive for this report.
Thank you very much, Aslam. Are there any questions? Is it agreed? Thank you very much. We now move on to item 10 and over to Andy.
Thank you, Hazel. This is the second quarter revenue and capital monitoring of our budget for this financial year. It's the second report we've had to exec, and the budget position remains still very, very challenging. We have a net overspend at this forecast of 0.7 million, and that is after using all of the contingency in the budget. It was actually higher than that, but at quarter one, we hadn't released the £3.2 million of general contingency cover. The underlying reasons for the difficulties in our budget are continuing and ongoing high levels of demand for some of our core services, where the demand is outstripping the resources allocated in those services. Some delivery delays in terms of some of the savings program that we've got, and then some reductions in income streams compared to what we were expecting. All of these things are related to and impacted by the pandemic. And I suppose in recognition of that, the government has continued to provide some level of support into this financial year, but actually that support is all used within the current outturn position that I've just mentioned, and it's only for Q1, and we don't know about any support beyond Q1 at this stage. The £6.7 million mentioned in the report of general support from the government is being used to provide enhanced support and protections to the community to meet delays in delivery of savings and to offset some of the income shortfalls, because although the government came up with a scheme to compensate councils for lost income due to trading, actually we only get £0.7 million of grant support, and we're using 4.2 of the general grant support from the government to cover off some of the uncompensated income shortfalls that aren't covered by their scheme, which is meant to cover losses around trading. There are a number of areas of cost pressures that we're continuing to experience and have been part of our experience for a number of years now. So homelessness, social care for children and families. We're also seeing waste disposal costs and the reduced trading activity that I already mentioned. Some of this is also offset, as well as by using some of that grant support, by savings in borrowing costs. There's a lot of detail of the current savings position and where savings are up to and whether they're delivered or not, whether they're likely to be on track and just delayed by a year, or whether we're having to rethink them and plan again for this February's coming budget in Appendix B. So Appendix B and paragraphs 14 to 17, I would say, in the report itself, give a really clear state of play in terms of our savings programme. And actually, paragraph 14 is worth noting. So our total savings programme over the last 3 years is 38.605 million. And actually, we've delivered 71% of that, which is pretty good going. But it's just an indication of how financially stressed the council has been by austerity and then a pandemic on top of that. But there's a lot of helpful detail in paragraphs 14 to 17. And kind of what I've talked through so far relates to recommendations 1 to 5 in terms of, because of some of the difficulties that we're still experiencing, recommendations 1 through 4 kind of set that out. Recommendation 5 requests that recovery plans are put in place by the end of December. So that is an important recommendation. Across the wider accounts, we've got the public health account, the housing revenue account, and the schools budget. All of those are underspent. So the public health budget is underspent by around 0.3 million, and that's mainly relating to activity-based health contracts. So it's underspent because the activity isn't as high as it was originally predicted to be, leading to that underspend rather than not spending money that's available for public health. And then the housing revenue account is underspent by around 0.8 million and the schools budget by about 0.6 million. In terms of capital expenditure, the current position forecasts a reduction in the overall spend for the year against what was programmed of 14.7 million. And this is where recommendations 6 and 7 are important. So recommendation 6 is about the decarbonisation grant, which now needs to be agreed and put into our budget. Already agreed at full council, but it's just being noted in the report here. And then recommendation 7 is about environments, which is where you had money. We had money in particular pots for particular projects, and it's being moved to deliver either something very similar but in a slightly different way, or the details of all of that is set out at paragraphs 43, 44, and 45. So with that covers all the recommendations and the detail of the report. So I'll just move those recommendations.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Andy. Questions, Tom? Okay, are there any questions? Rob.
Thank you. Look, I think the question really relates to the overspend on the agencies, really. Again, it sort of relates to the employment issues we have in the council. And as soon as we're able to get in a position to get those down and get these agencies out or getting people employed, we will be in a better position. But so I know I have raised my concerns about this, but every time I see this, it does raise a concern for me again. So I'm just asking, is there anything we may be doing now to look to try and get people employed into the system rather than use agencies? Because we all know it talks here about overwork, overloaded. We all know there's concerns here. I'm just wondering what we're doing about it. That's all. And I'll have another question when I may after that. Thank you.
Okay, Andy?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I'm just looking through the performance report, which is actually not the next report, but the one after, because actually that's where the percentage of agency staff, etc., is reported. And I know we've actually made some good progress on that in children's social care, at least. I think in a number of other areas as well over recent years. But it might be that the pandemic has caused additional stress to our ability to deliver that. But it's an important point. I think. I guess it's a point that's relevant to both the finance monitoring and the performance indicators. While I report them, I'm not the accountable person for each of those services. Actually, it's everyone around the table, as it were, who needs to go and have these conversations about actually, are we doing everything we can absolutely be doing to get down the number of agency staff to make sure that we're delivering on our performance indicators, etc., etc. So I think I would look to my colleagues to continue some of that work, as well as, when I report it here, we can have a conversation about it, but we can all lead on that outside of this setting.
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate what you're saying there in relation to it's across the board. The other thing I want to mention here is in relation, when we look at the loss of traded finance income with schools due to conversions to academies and service reductions to statutory levels for other schools. Being a government school, it really wasn't just down to that, it was also down to the service delivery, really, because as a government school, we wanted to stay with the local authority as long as we could, but the delivery was not great. And that's one of the reasons why, as a governor of a school, we had to go to look elsewhere. But we wanted to stay with local authority. So my other question, it may not be for you, Andy, my other question is all the other services of delivery that we do offer in relation to what the council can offer as a service to get more income, because there's a lot of stuff that we do. We have an MOT bay, is for one. And I just wondered, as a council, are we looking at all the things that we can offer out to the public in detail to sort of say, how can we actually offer this service better but deliver as well? Thank you.
I absolutely agree that it's an important point. I think the individual services where we're becoming aware, or we become aware, that delivery might not be quite up to where it would ideally be, so that we can net more income from that. Again, I would look to my colleagues to go and have those conversations with their services. I think the more general point I would make, standing back over the last 8 years or so, I think we've delivered £160 million of savings, somewhere in the region of that. And I believe I'm still right in saying only around 10%, maybe it's more like 15 now, because of the impact of the emergency budget. And, we were at a very financially stressed point already by austerity. Like, we had to make some very difficult decisions for the emergency budget, but it's probably in the region of 10 to 15% of those savings have impacted on frontline delivery in terms of reductions to what we offer to the people of Luton. What I would point out, therefore, is that a lot of the savings that we have made over those 8 years, in terms of that 160 million, was delivered by increasing income. So we've done a huge amount of work. There was always more to be done, and I would encourage my colleagues to go and have those conversations with their service to make sure we're in the best shape we can be to try and sell those services as far and wide as possible and come up with creative ideas and try and get them into play. But I think a huge amount of work has been done over the period of austerity and having to make significant budget savings year on year to actually deliver those from making increases in income that the council achieves across a whole range of services.
You okay there, Rob? Question, Javed, is it? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. My question on 1.5 is request officers to put in place a recovery plan by the end of December. to ensure that balanced outrun position is achieved by the current year. I would have thought that's a given, and how realistic is it? Because bear in mind there's holiday and Christmas and all that, how achievable that is? Is that realistic?
I believe it will slip. I'll look to Deb because I'm, not operational, so I can only really look to Deb to provide a little bit of detail of how that's going to be achieved and what that will look like.
Thanks, Andy. Yes, we're working on that. There's a meeting taking place on Thursday, which is Robin is going to chair that. And in that meeting, we're talking about a plan in order to deliver the savings and at the same time recovery plan to address those shortfall. So the time scale is tight, but I think if we've got a budget gap, we've got to make sure we close that budget gap ASAP. So that meeting specifically will be discussed on those issues on Thursday.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted reassurance because it's asking us to request officer. I would have thought that's a given anyway.
I think you're right, it's given, but just really wanted to put it on record that the executive is aware what work is being done to turn around the gap into a balanced budget. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions from anybody? Tom?
Yeah, mine on page 27, Andy, about temporary accommodation. I will say I am getting very, very frustrated at the moment by the way the council operates. We've saved 19, but we could have an awful lot more, a lot bigger saving there, and our numbers could be cut. At the moment in this town hall, I have got up to 140 properties in various guises, what are fully funded, what have got full planning permission, so the members have done their job, but I've got different departments of the council arguing, and some of them are telling me it'll be 12 months before we can do a tender for a 40-odd flat scheme. I believe it is now time in this town hall, we either get the departments sit down together and operate properly. 12 months is completely unacceptable. It's costing us money. Each one of these schemes now has gone back 2 or 3 months. So with the cost of materials and labour in the private sector to do that work, it's probably cost us 2%, if not 3%. That 2% on £40 million worth of schemes would have paid for us to have a development team dedicated in this town hall. But instead we've lost that and we still haven't speeded up any of the schemes. It is no longer acceptable. It's not good enough. I believe now is the time to say, sorry procurement, sorry housing development, we are putting a proper development team into place, what's going to operate in this town hall, because you can't do your job. On top of that, on page 45, where the rent arrears in temporary accommodation build up, it's not a true figure. Because what we've got is got a lot of people, what asylum seekers, what have got no recourse to public funds in temporary accommodation. If they weren't in that case I've been dealing with today with 4 children, if they weren't in that temporary accommodation, and there's no way they're going to be able to pay the rent because they've got no recourse, the father's got no recourse to public funds, but because 2 of the children was born here, we picked them up. What would happen is that'll go on. The rent arrears for temporary accommodation. We've got a lot of cases like that now. Once they've been here long enough and they qualify for universal credit, the universal credit will only start from the qualification day. So we can't hit them for the arrears, but they're still showing up as arrears in temporary accommodation. The only other option is you took them kids into care, and those kids in care will cost you 3 times as much. So that's why housing takes them in and puts them in temporary accommodation. But can we have a true figure for the rent arrears? I know it's all the general fund, but it's not a true figure we're getting because some of that rent will never be able to be collected. But I am serious now, and I'd ask the support of the group. If the council can't get its act together on getting some of these sites on the go, and just on the HRA, the 70-odd units waiting to come out of the ground, fully financed, full planning permission, ready to go, and we can't get it. And even worse is 3 months ago in this council chamber, I said to Dev, about outside options, but we're coming in 3 months and 2 weeks later. I'm still waiting for an answer. We've got outside bodies what prepared to take care of our temporary accommodation, but no one's stepping in to do anything about it. So these figures, I've said to Colin, the figures don't matter anymore if the town hall can't get its act together. And I am getting very, very frustrated over it now, because I hate the fact that I've got planning permission, fully funded schemes waiting to go, and I've got different departments of this council arguing with each other over whose fault it is why they're not being built. That is wrong.
Understand your frustration, Tom. Not sure Andy can answer all of those questions that you've raised tonight, and it might need that to come back separately outside of this meeting. But
Yeah, I guess I would say on like a development and delivery body, I would say it's within your gift to bring a proposal for something like that as the housing portfolio holder. If you feel like that's what's needed to talk to your relevant officers and to work something up on the debt recovery on page 45. I believe that is historic debt that we're seeking to recover, so it wouldn't be the total debt anyway. It's a different project. And then on
the overspend, I think he's talking about.
Yeah, so I think on page 45 it's a slightly different project because it's collecting historic debt. On the delivery of the comparison of what some outside companies came to offer us, I'm talking to the dev regularly when we meet about, because it's essentially a financial model, which is why Dev's the person to look at it. And actually, it makes a huge amount more sense for us to do that financing. We just need to work out the parameters for it, and then we'll be able to go. And that's what Dev's still working on. I don't know if you want to add anything, but like it makes entire sense. It would not make sense really for us to ask someone else to do that, because it's a financing thing, and actually we lose out if we ask someone else to do it, which is why it makes most sense for us to do it.
Yes. Just a minute, Tom. Robin?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Leader. I've just found the brief that I've had from the relevant service, which states clearly that the services are working together, and the position isn't quite as Councillor Shaw has laid out. So I'm just Tom.
Tom, let's let the chief exec finish. Then you can come back. All right, but let's do it
so
properly.
I would suggest that actually this isn't the right forum to be having this conversation, and that we could have this conversation in another forum in a more productive and positive way.
I disagree, because I've tried to have that discussion in other forums over the last 2 or 3 weeks, and I've had the two departments blaming each other, and that's just not right.
Well, can we arrange for a meeting outside of the executive, please, that I come along to and find out what's going on here? Yeah. Okay. Rob.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, Tom's asked for support of the group, and I think we ought to give him support because there's obviously something urgently needs to be looked at here. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we'll get it sorted outside of here. Any other questions or comments from anybody? No? Are we okay to agree the report? Thank you very much. We now move on to item 11, and I think that's you, Andy, again, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I've got 3 in a row today.
Yeah.
So this is the setting of the council tax base for the upcoming financial year. It's a technical report, a legal requirement that we do this. I could probably just leave it as let's read the recommendations 1 and 2, because that sets out the number of bandy equivalents that we've got. And then point 2 of the recommendations is that we are expecting or predicting a 96% collection rate for 22-23, because we're still expecting some impact of the pandemic. I think that there's more detail in the report. We've seen quite an uplift from last year to this year in terms of the overall number of bandy equivalent properties. And that's partly to do with a number of new properties being built. We've also got the empty home premiums that we've progressively put in place over the last few years as and when that's become possible. I think I'll leave it at that. The report's pretty self-explanatory and it's a legal requirement and almost a technicality that we have to do this.
Thank you, Andy. Are there any questions? Comments? We agree that? Thank you very much. And the performance report, Andy.
Thank you, Hazel. So with this one, you don't want to look at the official exec report. It's all the detail is in the appendix. There's a nice summary at the beginning in terms of what some things that are going well and some things that would be red indicators. I would note that a number of the things at the bottom are much longer term targets. So this is only the second iteration of this new set of performance indicators, which are aligned to Luton 2040. So we know that we're starting off on a long journey there. So that's why some of them are kind of projecting well out into the future where we want to get to. And it's going to be a bit of a journey to get there, I suppose. I think in line with that, I was going to say, where is it? Oh yeah, the team are looking to get in place, because it's a fairly new set of indicators. Some indicators are about reducing net carbon emissions, because they've not managed to get anything specifically detailed in there as yet. There's some nice detail kind of in the appendix in the theme areas in the write-up. So on page 77, the first box on that page, the bottom paragraph there is all about some work we're looking at around the apprenticeship levy and seeking to kind of broker partnerships in the town to allow people to use that and to share that and be really effective in kind of the employment prospects work that we're trying to achieve. The next page, page 78, the second box at the top there has some really important detail around average salaries. That's something that we've started measuring. It seems to be quite significantly out and quite significantly changed this year, probably because of the impact of the pandemic. So there has been an increase of average salary for those living in Luton, but there's been a much bigger increase for those working in Luton who don't live in Luton. So I think that's one to keep an eye on for sure. There's detail on the next page about unemployment rates. And I think there was one or two more things that I wanted to point out. So on page 85, there's some detail about employment outcomes for adults accessing services because of mental health problems. There's some really good performance outlined there. Page 87 has some details of our year 12 and 13. So after leaving high school, so once you're in college kind of age, our special educational needs rate of pupils who are not in education, employment or training at that stage is really quite positive. I think that was all I wanted to pick up on. So with that, I'll move the report, and if anyone wants to discuss any of the recommendations, like I say, it's actually, I present it, but it's all of our areas. So we need to take collective responsibility for achieving these.
Thank you, Andy. I'm sure we all understand that. Are there any questions? Yes, David.
Yeah, thank you, Hazel. Just two, please. On page 74, the very top line, I always look at these charts assuming that year to date is the sum of the quarters where we've got figures. So year to date would be the sum of Q1 and Q2. That clearly isn't the case on those figures. Is that because the year to date figure comes from a different source, or is my assumption wrong in the first place?
I'm going to have to look. Yeah,
Year to date would be about 7.2.
Exactly. I don't know what that. I don't know if there's someone here who can answer this question. Perhaps not. Maybe we'll have to get the detail of that and make sure it's right next time. Or yeah, I would assume that it would be Q1 plus Q2 would give us year to date, and it's not a percentage. So that yeah.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you for picking it up.
On page 78, the small print at the bottom of the charts on average salaries, I don't know what these words actually mean. I'm used to seeing figures for people who live in Luton, wherever they're employed, and people who work in Luton, wherever they live. But I'm not sure that that description is actually giving us that information.
I think it is. Sorry. I'll put my mic on. I believe it is, because if you look at the detail, I know, yeah, I can see what you're saying about the legend at the bottom not being particularly clear in terms of what it's saying. But if you read, I think it's the second bullet point in the second box. So residence-based full-time earnings in Luton rose by 1.2% and workplace-based full-time earnings increased by 14.8%. I think it is talking about what we think it's talking about. It's just that the legend isn't particularly clear, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you for that. Could be clearer. That's
Okay, so you'll come back on those, Andy, yeah? Yeah. Thank you. Are there anybody else? Anybody other questions, comments? Are we happy to agree? Thank you very much. We're now moving into private.